President, please sit down.
I'd like to call the San Francisco Election Commission meeting of 21 February 2018 to order at 6 p.m. Secretary Chan, would you please call the roll?
President Donaldson.
Here.
Vice President Mogi.
Here.
Commissioner Jadanik.
Here.
Commissioner Jung.
Here.
Commissioner Rowe.
Here.
Commissioner Paris.
Here.
Commissioner Stefan is not here. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Next item.
Item number 2, general public comment. Public comment on any issue within the Elections Commission's general jurisdiction that is not covered by another item on this agenda.
Do you have any public comment? Yes.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is David Carey. While it's still early in the calendar year, I want to take the opportunity to thank each of you for your efforts, your time, and your dedication while serving on this commission. I especially want to congratulate the Commission's 2 new officers, President Donaldson and Vice President Mogi. At a personal level, I can relate to the sentiments of seeing big shoes to fill, and I'm still learning. Thanks for not letting those sentiments hold you back, and thanks to both of you for instead rising to meet the challenges and demands of your new roles. As a counterpoint, I'll suggest that I'm still learning is part of the ongoing experience of every commissioner, no matter what level of expertise or experience one brings to the commission. Learning is best done actively. I'm reminded of the old prescription about how to learn. It has 3 parts: see one, do one, teach one. With that in mind, I'd also like to commend other commissioners for your ongoing efforts to develop and support the potential of your fellow commissioners. Well done. It is the combined efforts of all of you that allow this commission to continue being a leader in helping to make San Francisco's elections exemplary. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Seeing no additional public comment.
Item 3.
Item 3, please.
Open source voting. Discussion and possible action regarding the City and County of San Francisco's open source voting system project. 4 parts, A, B, C, 3, Commissioners' reports, Technical Advisory Committee report, Director's report, draft report by Slalom.
Commissioners, anything to report?
Yeah, I have a few things to report on this topic. So in the last week of January, I spoke at an event at UC Hastings College of Law about the open source voting project. I was a part of a panel, and it went well. There were probably about maybe 70 people or so watching. And also Secretary of State Alex Padilla spoke the keynote in the morning, and there was a question posed to him about open source voting, and I thought his response was kind of interesting. He said something like, I didn't have the video to catch a direct quote, but it's something to the effect of that counties should hurry along to submit a system for certification that's open source. So it wasn't really a preference for open source, but he did kind of indicate that it's up to the counties to hurry up and to submit a system. A few weeks ago, I submitted feedback to Slalom on their draft report. I submitted quite a bit of feedback, and so we can see we're waiting to receive the final draft. And recently, I started speaking with the executive director of the California Clean Money campaign, and they've started expressing an interest in the open source voting project in San Francisco. And actually, today they just issued a press release endorsing the project and asking the mayor and the board to fund the project, which is exciting. And lastly, I just want to say that I did read the RFP in its entirety, and I thought the director did a great job with it. And I really liked the language around open source voting and how he spoke about it, and as well as the language around risk limiting audits and open data. And the other thing that I thought was really good about the RFP is that it has the respondents issue proposals for both 2, 3, and 4-year initial terms. So it gives the city some flexibility in how it wants to, have that contract. So that's all I have to report.
Other commissioners? Commissioner Jurdonic, would you like to proceed with anything on VTAC?
Well, if we do have a member of the advisory committee here, Member Bufundo.
Hello. Well, I guess take a quick second to introduce myself. My name is Larry. I've been on the Technology Advisory Council. In my personal capacity, I work for a group called 18F, which is a consultancy within the federal government that helps federal agencies modernize technology. Prior to that, I worked with IDEO on the Los Angeles County voting modernization effort. So I don't have a lot of updates to report outside of what Commissioner Jurdonic had already reported. The committee is focused on a couple of key areas. One is continuing to monitor developments in election technology, modernization efforts, specifically in terms of, we'll skip past that for a second. Building awareness for the committee's efforts and the efforts in general for the city here. The folks on the committee have been speaking at a number of different opportunities throughout the industry, including the National Election Integrity Conference in October, and have a couple more planned for the future in 2018, Libre Planet and OSCON. We continue to keep working on evolving our recommendations document, and there's 2 particular areas that we're focusing on for the next meeting on March 8th, which is rounding out recommendations for the use of agile procurement strategies for managing an effort like this, as well as secure Butte. Thanks.
Thanks for the update. Any questions, commissioners? Great. Director Arntz, would you like to give any highlights from your director's report regarding open source?
Yeah, mine bleeds into D as well, subsection D on 3. So I just received, prior to coming up here, the next draft of the Slalom business case, assessing the options, the feasibility of the options. So that did arrive today. I haven't looked through it yet.
Okay. So that arrived today. Will that be published then immediately, or is it going through another review cycle?
Right, it's going through another review cycle.
Okay. And then how long can the public expect before the report is final?
The only deadline that I received was that we'd get the next draft by today. I don't have any deadline for the final product.
Okay. And I think we had some discussion of this at the BOPEC and the dependency or relationship to any funding for open source in the next fiscal. So I just want to point out that we had that discussion. I know that you're certainly aware of that, but you felt that was not going to impact anything in terms of the budget cycle, correct? Well, given that today, I believe today was the first day for consolidated budget requests.
Right. So the mayor's office, which is what I said in BOPEC, will have to make a decision on any funding for any open source development. And when it comes to COIT funding the development of the system, the open source system is one of the technological highlights of COIT's future projects. As far as funding is concerned, I would imagine it still comes from the mayor's office, even though COIT has a set budget. But the departments that are seeking funding from COIT are many, and there's also some very, very large projects, like the fiber throughout the city project, and things like that. So I don't know how much money Coit had. I don't think Coit has money specifically allocated to developing an open source voting system at this time. And I think that any funding that would happen in the next fiscal year would essentially come from the mayor's office upon a Coit recommendation to develop the system or a component of the system.
Is there anybody at Coit that's getting the draft copies of Slalom at this point, or are they reviewing and giving any feedback?
Yeah, so Matthias Jaime, he's the director of Coit, and so he's received the first draft. He's received the second draft. He was on the email. So he's met with Slalom during the preparation of the business case or the ongoing preparation. So yeah, certainly Coit is aware of it, and also Ken Burkowski. He's a deputy director over at the Department of Technology. He's a member of Coit. And then Linda Garrell, who's the director of technology in the city, she's also a member of Coit, and she's also been receiving and participated in providing input into the business case.
Okay. Do you know, did they give any feedback? I mean, that would be an indication they've read it.
To the first draft,
Yeah.
yeah, right.
Okay. So that's good. So they're aware that that's coming, and then where it's
Oh, yeah.
where it's at. Okay, the progress. Okay. Thank you. Other questions?
Yeah, I have just a question. I talked to you about this outside of the meeting, but just so other people know, there's a good chance that you're going to probably have to give some kind of a brief presentation before Coit, sort of like you did a couple years ago about the project, do you think, or you're not sure on that?
Yeah, I don't know at this point, but if Coit is, if the question gets to Coit for this budget cycle, or even next, yeah, at some point, whatever, if Coit makes any decision or recommendation to the mayor's office regarding funding, then the department would have to step forward and provide a presentation to Coit, to the Coit members. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Commissioners, any other questions? And we covered the draft Solemn report, so I don't know if there's any other questions on that at this time. Okay. Any public comment on this item?
Hello, Commissioners. Brent Turner with California Association of Voting Officials. Wanted to thank Commissioner Jordanic for pointing out that we did ask the question of Secretary Padilla, and his response was curious at best. I do have that on my cell phone if anybody cares to look at it. Maybe I could send it in so you can see the response that we're getting there. There will be an election coming up, so we'll see what happens there, but there are some folks that have open source elections as a platform running as well, so there may be some relief from the vendors. Also, it's great news that this afternoon at 4 o'clock we had the California Clean Money Campaign release to the press that they will be stepping in to advocate for the open source election system. I think their numbers are right around 100,000 in California, so that allows us to make sure that everybody's getting notification regarding progress on this issue. I have a question, 3 questions. I don't expect answers, but the first, given the size of the procurement, being that it's greater than 10 million, why has the LBE subcontracting goal been waived? Can we provide an explanation? And why was that approved as a grant waiver? The second question is the due date for questions is very close to the proposal date, which equates to only a few days to get answers. Can the proposal date be extended to accommodate more time to digest answers to questions and complete the RFP proposal? And third, Slalom handed in their finished proposal. Now it is being revised. Who exactly is making these revisions, and why is it being done without public participation? The concern is that
Slalom is doing the best they can, but then it's going behind the curtain and coming back out. So hopefully the public will be given what Slalom originally created, and then the red line version as well as the completed version, so we can see who has adjusted the report and to what end, and just compare between what was originally submitted by Slalom at the direction of the county government and then what the final result is. In closing, I note that we're still moving farther and farther into the future on the finalization of a system. So, you know, the goal was, back when we started 15 years ago, to have this accomplished in 2008, and then 16 and 20. Now we're looking at 22, 24. Thank you for your time.
Hi there. My name is David Schmidt, and I'm a board member and volunteer representing the California Clean Money Campaign that our last speaker just referred to. We are a grassroots nonprofit focused on the issues of money and politics and fair elections, with over 110,000 supporters in California and over 15,000 in San Francisco. We're happy to endorse development of San Francisco's open source paper ballot voting system. This is a crucial time for San Francisco to lead the nation, and we hope that you can get going on this and push it as fast as possible. We'd like to thank the Elections Commission for its advocacy on the issue and for calling for the first $4 million in funding to start the system. We're also happy that the recommendation is that the software, to the extent possible, use the General Public License 3.0 open source license so that other counties may freely use the software, and that San Francisco and the public will also benefit from any improvements they subsequently make. We hope they'll stick to that. And we're here to encourage fully funding and developing the system and look forward to the Commission's continued leadership. Our executive director, as was mentioned, put out a press release today. I have 2 copies of it that I'm going to share with you in just 1 minute. But first, I want to read what our executive director, Trent Lang, said in the press release. He said, "Americans fear for the security of our democracy. Public open source paper ballot voting systems would dramatically increase the security and transparency of our elections. That's why the California Clean Money Campaign joins open source and electoral reform advocates praising San Francisco for its open source voting system project. We encourage San Francisco to fully fund and develop it as quickly as possible." And there's more, and I will give you 2 copies. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you again. My name is David Carey. I understand the explanations of the process for budgeting for next fiscal year. What kind of leaves me a little bit confused is, under normal circumstances, my understanding is that something like as big as the open source voting system would need to have presentations and paperwork going through COIT, and with specific budget requests perhaps going through the normal budgeting process. And from what I've seen, those things are not happening. And I'm not also hearing any descriptions of specific agreements with the mayor's office that those things can be skipped in this case. And so it leaves me the impression that there's actually little prospect of there actually being anything budgeted for the next fiscal year as a result of the current budget cycle. And so I'm just kind of, is there something that I'm missing, or is that really kind of what the prospects look like? Thank you.
Seeing no further members of the public, I do want to acknowledge the questions from Mr. Turner. I want to mention that there was an email that came in, but it did not have time to make it into the packet with these questions. So we'll make sure that is published with our next meeting. I would suggest that these questions should be formally submitted as questions to the RFP. I would suggest around as part of the normal bid process. I think that would be the appropriate thing, certainly if there seem to be irregularities that this, from a contracting standpoint, this is certainly a good forum to bring them. But other than that, I think this is a contracting matter. I don't know if the commissioners have any other questions on those first two questions. And in terms of the Slalom report, I will take it under advisement, that request. Any other questions? Commissioners? No? Next item, please, Secretary Chan.
Item 4, approval of minutes of previous meeting. Discussion and possible action to approve minutes for the January 17th, 2018 Election Commission meeting.
Any questions on the minutes, or do I have a motion?
I move to approve the minutes.
I second that motion.
Secretary Chan, the vote, please.
President Donaldson,
Yes.
Vice President Mogi,
Yes.
Commissioner Jadanik,
Yes.
Commissioner Jung,
Yes.
Commissioner Paris,
Yes.
Commissioner Rowe,
Yes.
Commissioner Safan.
Yes.
You have a unanimous vote.
Very good. Next item, please.
Item 5, Commissioners' Report. Commissioner reports on topics not covered by another item on this agenda. Meetings with public officials, oversight and observation activities, long-range planning for commission activities and areas of study, proposed legislation which affects elections.
Commissioners, any comments?
Well, as you may know, my term expired at the beginning of 2018. I decided not to renew my term, so after the 60-day holdover at March 1st, I will no longer be on the commission. This is a combination of both professional and personal goals. I came in here with an agenda. I had top three things I wanted to take care of. The state beat me to 2 of them. The third one was approving open source voting system. So other than kind of babysitting open source voting system, I kind of don't have a agenda purpose. And had I been in this exact same spot, 3 years ago, I don't think I would have run for the commission. I don't want to just sit in the seat. I want to have something to dig my heels into. And I'm just happy the state beat me to it. But that kind of doesn't give me as much of a need to be here. Combined with personal reasons such as missing more meetings because of National Guard duty trainings, or specifically my grandmother who is declining, shall we say, and I would rather spend more time with her. I'm already spending about 3 nights a week, but she may need some additional care, and I would prefer to be a larger part of that. So those 2 reasons were the reasons I decided not to ask the Board of Education to renew my term for 5 years. So this unfortunately will be it. I did have a very lovely time spending here, and honestly, if I didn't have these other issues, I would continue serving. So I want to thank you all for the opportunity that I've been given, and I'm very appreciative of it all.
So this is your very last meeting?
Very last one.
Well, let me then just be the first to thank you for being on the commission. I think from my perspective here on the end of the table, you always provided some heart to our discussions, and it was much appreciated. And thank you, and good luck with your next endeavors. And if I may, just thank you.
Thank you.
I'll be here all night.
No big rush to get out the door, eh? Well, thank you for your service, Commissioner Paris. You'll be missed, and we'll look forward to your successor and big shoes to fill.
I will be trying to work with the Board of Education to try to hurry them along. The seat was vacant before I was filled for many months, and I don't want that to be the case again. So I will be unofficially prodding the Board of Education to pick a successor and do what I can to facilitate a quick replacement.
Great. I'd like to also, on the heels of that, I'd like to also point out that Commissioner Jung has been reappointed and will be for another 5-year term. And so we're glad to have Commissioner Jung with us for another period. So we can applaud that too. Thank you for continuing to serve. And the only last thing, I did write it down. I wanted to note that Commissioner Safant joined us at 6:02 p.m. Other commissioner reports. Secretary Chen, next item, please.
Item 6, Director's Report. Director's Report on topics not covered by another item on this agenda.
Yeah, so for my report, one thing I want to add, in Section 2A, I didn't, in the second sentence, that the Prop N election for certain non-citizen voters to vote in school board elections will take place this November, 2018. That wasn't clear in the sentence, so I want to clarify that. And I think everything else is pretty much clear in here. The charter amendment that we discussed, or I discussed at previous commission meetings, Supervisor Fewer tabled that at a Rules Committee hearing. So there is no other amendment. There's no legislation in place right now that would in any way affect the implementation of Prop N. So the department has been greatly involved in getting Prop N implemented. We have a draft plan that's on our website. We've met with community groups several times. We've established a discussion group. It focuses solely on implementation of Prop N. We've also been in discussion with the supervisors who are interested in this matter. So yeah, just want to make sure it's clear. It's not clear in my report, but I want to put on the record that November 2018 is when the Prop N election will take place in San Francisco.
Okay.
So Director Ernst, what are the actual additional types of tasks that you need to do for this implementation?
Well, it's essentially running a separate election. So as much as possible, we want to fold the processes, products, and training, what have you, into our established practices. But it's still a little bit different, and also reaches a specific group of people who have separate qualifications than most voters. So just from the beginning, we have to create a registration affidavit for these voters. We have to create a separate database that can't. So these voters' records can't sit in the same database as regular voters because of the statewide database program. Then also there's a lot of concerns about the handling of the information, the accessibility of the information through information requests due to the status of these folks as non-citizens, and any potential threat of harm that could come from the federal government to these folks based on the information they provided the department in relation to registering to vote for school board elections. So right now, a lot of the activities that I've been engaged with community groups and with the supervisor's offices has been around the handling of that information. That's been more of what folks are concerned about now as far as implementation is concerned. But it'll be a big task to nail this, to get this done by November. But yeah, so we'll try to get an affidavit done in March that we can circulate and start to see if there's start to bring information in and get the database set up. Yeah.
And then if the voter registrations are going to be kept separate, the ballots would still be part of the rest of the ballots, though, right?
It'll be the similar looking ballot. It'd be essentially a separate ballot type.
But would it go through the same precinct scanner? Okay.
So it'll be a ballot type that's programmed into that. And so when we tabulate, we can run the cards along with the other cards. It'll be probably a 4 or 5 card ballot for November. So we'll be able to process the non-citizen card for school board elections along with the cards for regular voters, for lack of a better word. But we can't, there's an issue though, we can't really include the non-citizen voters into the turnout percentage because they're not voting a full ballot, and the turnout is based on card 1, and this is probably like card 4 of a 5-card ballot. But we will accumulate the results from the Prop N election with the results for the regular voters. But processing will be a bit different, like with the vote by mail. Since it's a separate database, we have to handle those, the Prop N ballots separately, which would necessitate probably a separate, distinct vote by mail envelope, so we can pull that envelope prior to processing. So yeah, so it'll be a separate ballot. To answer your original question, it'll be a separate ballot type that the system can handle along with the other cards. So it won't be, the tabulation will be probably the most straightforward aspect of implementing the Prop N.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
I had another question about the June 5th election. Under your report, it does say that there's 6 ballot measures, and I don't know if this is how it's just properly put. Are those 6 ballot measures all initiatives applied by voters, or are they a combination of voter initiatives as well as the Board of Supervisors submissions?
Well, I thought I put initiative petition measures. Yeah, they're all, the 6 measures that I named, because February 5th was a deadline for submission of petitions.
Okay,
Yeah, so
I'm sorry,
initiative petition.
I didn't read it correctly. Just
Yeah, so we haven't, so then this Friday will be the deadline for the board to submit charter amendments. We haven't received any formally from the board, and we've not received any ordinances. So right now we have the 6 initiative measures, and then I think there's 5 state propositions, and then whatever comes down from the board.
5 state propositions?
I think it's 5, yeah, 5 or 6.
All right.
Is there a separate deadline for ordinances?
Yes. I didn't put it in here. It's March 9th, I think. Yeah, March 9th. I put the charter amendment deadline in the report since it's more near term than.
Is there a higher percentage of signatures required for charter amendments versus ordinances?
Right.
And if so, do you remember what it is? 10%, is it?
10% of registered voters versus 5. With mayoral election, right?
Thank you.
I have a question. For the Prop N, what if somebody actually a new voter comes in and they are a citizen and they register for the non-citizen? What's the scenario of, like, will they just be eligible then at that point, or would you correct that before Election Day? I'm just kind of curious on the process there.
Yeah, we haven't thought that one through. There's a lot of questions like that we haven't
Okay.
thought through. One thing with the affidavit is that there'll be a series of criteria like on the regular affidavit. So the Prop N voters would need to check a box that they are not a citizen. And then also there'd be probably additional materials that will be associated with the affidavit that voters can essentially self-assess whether they would be eligible for Prop N. And usually, currently, when this question is asked, it's whether the non-citizen voters would be eligible to register to vote in a Prop N. We haven't really thought about, well, what if a person who's a citizen would complete a Prop N affidavit? But we wouldn't know. I mean, we would have the affidavit of a person who's signed under penalty of perjury that he or she's a non-citizen. And that would be the ballot that person receives. But however, with that said, if someone were to realize the situation, then they could always register to receive a full ballot. And then now with the June election is when what's called conditional registration will take place. It's been termed a same-day registration or election day registration, I think. But it's conditional registration, so it's essentially the casting of a provisional ballot from election day to 14 days before. So even if someone were to miss the registration deadline of 15 days before an election, and they had, prior to E15, had completed the Prop N affidavit, they could always come to the department, complete a regular affidavit, and receive a full ballot. So.
Got it. And then for C1, it looks like this whole District 2 election, the plaintiff had filed an appeal. Is that going to even impact the June election at this point, or is it? What would
Well,
happen?
so all the parties, I'm handling that case. All the parties have asked the court to rule by this Friday, but we don't know whether that will actually happen.
Got it. Thank you.
Director Arntz, I have a question. Sometimes it's not always easy for a citizen to prove citizenship status. How does one prove non-citizen status, or is, for the purposes of Prop N, is the affidavit enough?
So this is one of the central challenges that we've been working through, and the challenge is, on the one hand, allowing a non-citizen to register by affidavit alone has one set of risks, right? The other set of risks is if you require documentation, what documentation do you require, and must that documentation be provided in response to a public records request, and also how would the department be able to evaluate, for example, a document potentially from another country establishing non-citizenship. So this is a very, as you can imagine, a very complex balancing that we're sort of actively working through with the department, but also with the Board of Supervisors. Does that answer your question?
Sort of, yeah.
Okay. I mean, the short answer is there's not really a clear way to do it. I mean, unlike with California voters, where you have the backup of VoteCal to determine whether someone's actually like a San Francisco resident or a U.S. citizen, you don't have that with non-citizen elections. So it's a really, really hard issue without a lot of parallels.
Very good. Other questions, commissioners? And I have to say, I have not yet read the RFP, but can you remind us when the RFP, what the due date is for bids?
February 28th.
So coming up, okay. Very good. Public comment on this item?
Thank you, Commissioners. I wanted to make a few comments about the RFP. There are a lot of good things in the RFP for San Francisco's next voting system. Two examples I'd particularly like to mention are the request for support for interfacing with an emerging open source voting system. And the other one was the support for risk limiting audits. I'd like to clarify some comments I made at December's Commission meeting. While sources other than voting system vendors are likely to provide better risk limiting audit support, it is still good to be including risk limiting audit requirements in this RFP. In fact, there are some features that are probably best provided by the voting system. Particularly, I'm thinking of the ability of a scanner to print a unique ballot ID on the ballot when it is first scanned. Doing that can help make random sampling of individual paper ballots, more efficient and less costly. Which brings me to another key point about the RFP. Tabulation audits, whether existing 1% manual tallies or risk limiting audits, really should be directly auditing the paper ballots. Auditing only the voting system's photographic images of ballots and relying on the voting system to find and display those images really does not provide the independent verification that an audit should provide. That said, what is in the RFP and its focus on auditing ballot images is still a useful step towards using better and more modern auditing techniques. Thank you.
Mr. Carey, I have a question for you. In your last public comment, you exhorted this commission to do what we can to make sure that our policy stance of developing a functional, fair, open source voting system actually happens. And you kind of pointed to what you would expect to see if we were on track. But specifically within what's what's within the purview and authority of this commission. Is there anything specific that you had in mind that you would like us to do that we're not doing now? You can think about it if you want.
Yes, there are. I think, I've been disappointed in kind of the pace of progress on the open source voting system. And I understand that there are organizational issues that are kind of beyond what the commission can deal with. And there are some organizational issues that maybe it can deal with. And one of the challenges that the open source voting system project faces is that there are kind of two different roles that are needed that the commission might oversee. And one is the process of conducting the elections, which is an ongoing need, and the other is kind of the specialized need of developing a voting system. Certainly one of the things that hasn't happened yet is having somebody whose primary job and something they're primarily accountable for, separate from the conduct of elections. Having a person like that who's leading the open source voting project. And I think the restriction is that has to be within the Department of Elections. And I'm hoping that this slalom report will provide a path for doing that. I've also been disappointed that there really hasn't been much of a project plan about how to move things forward. And I'm certainly hoping that the slalom report can, whatever it recommends, can be something that this commission and the Department of Elections can use to assess and find some steps forward. For me right now, in terms of maybe more specific suggestions, I'm kind of waiting to see the slalom report.
Thank you.
Hello again, Commissioners. Brent Turner, California Association of Voting Officials, thanking Commissioner Paris for his service here, and hopefully he'll be able to brief the incoming person/victim, and we can get somebody in place sooner rather than later. Thank you for that. The CAVO would like to associate ourselves with the eloquent comments of Mr. Carey regarding the ballot image scanning versus the audit of the actual ballots. Naturally, you have to go to the ballots. You can't just rely on an internal picture of that situation. Doesn't fly to the scientific community. Also, another quick note, and there were a few because we didn't have public comment previous, but on the record of the last meeting in the minutes, there was a mention of an event that occurred where there was a false police report filed, and it was alleged publicly that I had broken a disabled person's crutches. Just for the record, the person that filed that false police report was Jim Soper. It wasn't noted in the past minutes, so that should be reflected as that he's part of an activist group that comes and goes from these hearings. So we want to make note that when somebody's behaving that way, it should be understood and then moving forward. Also, regarding conflicts of interest, when we have people involved with the decision-making process like Oracle or Microsoft or even IDEO, who was involved in the Los Angeles debacle, that has to be noted. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but we have to keep very clear on what's going on here, because obviously the whole country is watching these proceedings and counting on San Francisco to lead California toward properly securable voting systems as soon as possible, and the gravity cannot be underestimated. So we have to bring bad news to the table, unfortunately, and I seem to be the one that drew the short straw and have been given that particular role. In closing, when we talk about the poor folks that may be in jeopardy because of the registration issues, this could have all been avoided, and we have to note it should have been avoided. We have to move forward quickly now. We can't continue to foot drag and kick the can further and further down the line, 2022, 2024. The people with interests other than transparency are winning right now. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Seeing no other public comment, next item, please, Secretary Chen.
Item 7, review of the department's fiscal year 2018 and 19 and 2019 and 20 proposed budgets. Discussion and possible action regarding the Department of Elections proposed budgets.
Thank you, Secretary Chan. So we reviewed the budget and at the last BOPEC meeting, and I will ask Secretary Commissioner Paris if he'd care to comment on the discussion there.
Yes. First, I need to actually congratulate the director for doing a very thorough job. I'm actually quite impressed every time I write down my little notes, 5 or 6, 7, sometimes 10, and then you can answer all of them usually without referring to your own notes. So that's actually pretty impressive. So tip of the hat to you for that. I don't have an enormous number of questions considering all of them have been answered. But if the other commissioners do need a moment, these spreadsheets are expansive, and I will not lie, it took me quite a bit to actually look through. And there is just, small points of clarification that, you may need. However, as a general whole, I'm actually quite pleased with where it's going, and also the projections, I think, are based on some very decent assumptions and logical assumptions as far as costs and budgeting for future years. So I was convinced. I'm very happy with the budget, but that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Commissioner Paris. So the best way to try and digest this, I think, is through the director's excellent summary. If you haven't had a chance to look at that, but just a few highlights that I would like to make based on the conversation we had at BOPEC. One is that you'll notice that on page 2 of 12 of the director's overview that there's quite a bit higher number for fiscal 19-20 versus 18-19, and that's due to the number of elections in that year. And that we have 2 in that year, whereas 1 in fiscal 18-19, right? Yes, thanks, Director. Additionally, there is an overlap in the year 18-19 for the existing system with the upcoming system for which the RFP is coming out now. So there's an overlap in that budget year, and which I think is prudent as we make the transition between the 2 systems. Certainly that's budgetary, and obviously seek to minimize that, but that overlap seems appropriate, certainly from a planning standpoint. The other thing was the Prop N. There's additional monies that are going to be paid by SFUSD to manage that election, and the differences, the special case in terms of the non-citizen voters. Beyond that, we did discuss the fact that the open source voting system is not in this budget, nor would it be, as Director Arns pointed out earlier on an earlier item, that is from the discretionary budget from the mayor as part of COIT. It would be the expectation. So that's why we would not see it in this budget. Director Arns, would you like to add anything to that, or correct anything I've said?
No, that's all accurate. No, not really. We did provide some updates. There was one form where the city just implemented a new budget system And so it's not, so the reporting function's not totally down yet. And there was one form that pulled the totals from the wrong row. So we resubmitted that to the commission. So that's why you received that one form twice. Wasn't the information was wrong.
Right.
As far as the department's work, which is that the numbers coming in from the system were incorrect. We had to manually input the information for that page, but we missed a row or a column. And then also, President Donaldson requested we note the Prop N from the recoveries for revenue totals for 18-19. So that's why you had the second issuance of the budget summary. And then how you read the budget form. One thing too. So the commission in the past always asked for these forms that we submit to the mayor's office in relation to the submission of the department's proposed budget. So this is why you receive these forms. This is exactly what the department is filling in, reviewing, and then submitting to both the mayor's and controller's offices. And to read it, the 17-18 budget essentially, so the original budget would be the current budget. Then the original projected is just the current budget. Let me use a different page actually before I confuse you further. But the way that these pages read, the 18-19 budget is based on the 17-18, and then the 19-20 budget is based on the 18-19, and the numbers are static for the most part when they move across the columns for fiscal years. When you see differences between these base budgets, it's because there's a calculation, a formula for, let's say, salaries. So according to the MOUs the city has with the various unions, there's going to be salary increases for the civil service folks. And so the system automatically pulls that information in and calculates the increases. So it's not the department. When you see a difference in the base budget, it's not the department inputting that information. It's coming from a formula that's calculating projected increases through MOUs, lease agreements, projected inflationary costs, and things like that. Also, what you're not seeing in this budget is the funds to build out Pier 31, because we'll be moving into Pier 31 in January. So there is still, I think it's $2 million some for the build out. That money's still on reserve at the call of the chair of the Budget and Finance Committee of the Board of Supervisors. So that money is still available, and we will pull from it, but it's not included in this budget total. And then the question was asked, I think, by Commissioner Paris if it would be similar for funding for developing an open source voting system, and I think so. I think that if the city were to fund the development of open source voting system, I don't think it would show in what this is called the base budget, the department's base budget. I don't think it would show up in these forms. One thing that I didn't expect, I thought and I mentioned this at BOPEC, so right now there's $2 million, which isn't a fixed cost. That's an amount to cover the cost for the system under the RFP. I didn't expect that to be in the department's fiscal base budget. I thought that'd be coming either through COIT or from a reserve fund of some type. So I didn't expect that, but that's why the $2 million is in the budget for the system under the RFP. But I don't think we'd have a similar statement of costs related to the development of an open source system in the department's base budget. So going forward, so just so you know what to expect from these forms and how and why these forms are developed the way that they are, and how money's stated as far as the department's base budget is concerned. So.
And last thing I'd like to add before we take any questions from the commissioners is that we did vote in BOPAC to recommend that the election commission. I'll read the actual words from Secretary Chan's notes was that we move to accept the proposal for FY 18-19 and recommend adoption by the full commission. So questions from other commissioners?
Question. Dr. Arns, thank you so much. Director Arns, thanks so much for doing this. I just have one question. I know we've had a conversation about this, but was it agreed by SFUSD to be paying for Prop N? A confirmation from them? I'm just curious about
No.
that.
So under the Ed Code, school districts reimburse counties for conducting the school district elections. And since Prop N is for school board members, it would be considered a school district election. And that's where that $160,000 is coming in under revenues. So no, there has not been an agreement with the school district. These are the projected costs at this time. If they were less, the city would seek less reimbursement from the school district. But at the time, as far as the budget projections for revenue recoveries in the department's base budget, $160,000 is the number.
Because I think that it was a charter amendment that was put upon the Board of Supervisor. So how does that normally work when that happens, when it's proposed by the Board of Supervisor, not really proposed by the Board of Education to put on this election? Who determines the funding for that kind of, of the actual election process?
Well, this is a unique situation.
Yeah.
I've not experienced this before, but traditionally and customarily, counties seek reimbursement from school districts for running the board elections or measure. For instance, if the school board were to put a parcel tax measure on the ballot, then the city would seek reimbursement because the school district, because a school is a separate district, even though it's within. And San Francisco is unique because the city and county boundaries are the same as the school district's boundaries. So the fact that Prop N wasn't contemplated originally by the school district, the fact that it's still a service the city provides the school district in relation to the election of school board members, it gets added to their recoveries. And this question has gone back and forth, but at this time the city has requested that the department place the $160,000 in its base budget and then seek recovery from the school district.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioners, other questions?
What is the process
Commissioner
of
Shaw?
seeking recovery like? Who does that?
We do. The department does. So we provide a initial cost estimate prior to the election. So the district. We also receive reimbursement from the community college district. So we provide a letter informing both districts of the estimated costs for conducting their elections prior to the election, and then after the election we summarize the cost for holding those elections and then provide an itemized table of the cost incurred for conducting the district elections, and then we request reimbursement. The community college is a little bit different because they actually pay every year, and they pay approximately 50% of projected costs for the next district election. Then they cover the remaining costs that second year, because the community college district does not want to have to cover the full reimbursement costs in one fiscal year, and that's but the school district reimburses the city or the county with one payment in one fiscal year.
Thanks.
Other questions, commissioners? Seeing none, take any comments from the public? Seeing none, do I have a motion?
So I move that we approve the proposed budgets.
Thank you, Commissioner John.
I second.
Commissioner Paris, thank you. Secretary Chan, would you take the vote, please?
President Donaldson,
Yes.
Vice President Mogi,
Yes.
Commissioner Judonic,
Yes.
Commissioner Jung,
Yes.
Commissioner Paris,
Yes.
Commissioner Rowe,
Yes.
Commissioner Safan.
Yes.
It carries with a unanimous vote.
Thank you. Next item, please.
Item number 8. I need to read this in its entirety, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
let's do
okay.
that.
Public Employee Appointment Hiring, Director of Elections. Discussion and possible action. The Director of Elections' current 5-year term expires at 12 a.m. on May 21st, 2018. The charter requires that the commission appoint a director for the next term at least 30 days before the expiration of the current term. SF Charter subsection 13.104. At this meeting, the commission may decide whether to appoint the incumbent director to an additional 5-year term or to engage in a competitive selection process in which the incumbent director may participate. Portions of the meeting may be held in closed session pursuant to California Government Code, subsection 54957B, and San Francisco Administrative Code, subsection 67.10B. A, public comment on all matters pertaining to this agenda item, including any comment pertaining to the Director of Elections selection, appointment, and/or whether to meet in closed session. Should we take that one at a time, or do you want me to read the entire?
Let's just go through, let's go through the entire instruction.
Okay. B, vote on whether to meet in closed session. C, discussion and possible action to appoint the incumbent Director of Elections to an additional 5-year term in open or closed session, per the Commission's vote. D, discussion and vote pursuant to Sunshine Ordinance subsection 67.12A on whether to disclose any portion of the closed session discussion regarding the public employee performance evaluation. E, if closed session is held, reconvene in open session, report action taken in closed session as specified in California Government Code subsection 54957.1A5 and San Francisco Administrative Code subsection 67.12B4.
Very good. Thank you, Secretary Chen. So how will we proceed on this is we will need to take a motion as to whether to go into closed session. So I would entertain such a motion. We'll take public comment and then vote on whether to go into closed session, at which time we will ask also, and yes.
I just wanted to speak to that point real quick.
Yes.
So any discussion about sort of, any performance-related discussion has to be in closed session.
Yes.
So it's theoretically possible, I suppose. Well, actually, let me put it a different way. It's hard for me to think about how a discussion about whether to reappoint could occur in open session.
Yes.
So I just wanted to put that out there for the Commission.
Thank you, Deputy City Attorney. Yes, so this would so we will start with an entertaining a motion whether to go into closed session. We cannot, as advised by Deputy City Attorney White, we cannot discuss these items in open session. So I would suggest that that would be necessary in order to proceed with the rest of this agenda item. So at which time we will review, we'll have a discussion about reappointment as it pertains to this item, and then we will reopen for the last agenda item.
I move that we go into closed session.
Point of order, do we need to have, or did we already do public comment for this item?
You do need to do public comment for this item, and I would suggest you do it before you go into closed session.
Yes, but my suggestion was we take the motion and then take public comment and then vote. So I have a first, or I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I second that motion.
Thank you. Public comment.
Yes, Commissioners, Brent Turner with CAVO. With all due respect to the good Director of Elections who's done a lot of great work for the county, I think it behooves the county at this point to have an open process and allow the Commission to take a look at some other candidates for the Director's position. This is not as retribution for what may be perceived as foot dragging regarding the open source election project. It's merely to open the process up and make sure that we're doing the best for the county that we can. Thank you very much.
Other public comment? Seeing none, Secretary Chan, will you take the vote, please?
President Donaldson.
Yes.
Vice President Mogi.
Yes.
Commissioner Judonic.
Yes.
Commissioner Jung.
Yes.
Commissioner Paris.
Yes.
Commissioner Rowe.
Yes.
Commissioner Safant.
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
We'll now go into closed session. We'll take 3-4 minutes to do that. Okay. Okay, returning to open session on item 8. We have already taken public comment. We've completed our closed session. The commission voted to disclose the results of this item, which is that we have voted to extend another contract of 5 years to Director Arntz, approved by the commission unanimously. Secretary Chan, next item.
Item 9, agenda items for future meetings. Discussion and possible action regarding items for future agendas.
Commissioners?
So the evaluation of the election plan, will that be at the next meeting?
Yes, there will be a BOPEC meeting that will review the election plan, and then we'll have that at the next meeting. I would also like to follow through on what we started, I guess in November, regarding the performance evaluation process for the director, which is that we set objectives and for the director, and so I'd like to do that at the next meeting to review that, and also to talk about the survey process. In the meantime, I will get back in touch with the DHS to talk with them about the survey process that they had suggested they were piloting, and see what the status of that is and report back on that. Any other comments, commissioners? Do we need to take public comment on this? Yes, okay. Any public comment on this item?
Good evening, Jim Soper. There is on March 7th a hearing in Sacramento at 9 a.m. in room 444. Joint session informational hearing by the Assembly and Senate Elections Commission on cybersecurity in elections. You may want to attend that, March 7th. Secondly, I think I sent in, I hope it got sent around, the actual text to the line item for the budget for buying or leasing election equipment. And I noted I didn't see any provision for R&D. This is the $134 million item in the budget, the governor's budget. This goes to budget committees in both the Assembly and Senate, and specifically subcommittees in both sides. Turns out that Philip Ting from San Francisco is, I believe I got this right, the chair of the budget committee. And David Chu is on the subcommittee for government operations, number 4. I'm going to encourage you to go into their offices and urge them to get R&D into that budget. Because if you don't, it's not going to be there. So there's a couple local people that will give you some leverage. And so that's what I've learned over the past month. I hope we can get some reasonable amount of money out of Sacramento to support the effort that San Francisco is making. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Soper.
And Deputy City Attorney White, am I correct that if we wanted to take that kind of action, we'd need a vote of the commission and then go through the city's lobbying department?
Yeah, it would be the State Legislation Committee.
Oh, I see.
It's similar to the process we followed with the bond.
Yeah, just a slight clarification. The State Legislation Committee said that they're no longer allowing the commission to directly bring something to them. We would have to go through the department. So the department would have to, we'd have to have the department do it.
If I make a quick comment, this is not legislation, this is budget. I'm told they're separate.
Okay. Other members of the public? Any further public comment?
Brent Turner with Cavo for a future agenda item. Maybe now that we're going to be assured of having Director Arntz for the next 5 years, maybe we can find out what we're doing as far as the budget with concrete answers and timeframes and benchmarks, because it seems like the way he answers is in terms of he thinks this, and it's not really clear what's going on. I know it does have to do with the mayor, it does have to do with Coit, but being that this may be the biggest issue of our time, it would be good if there was some distinct clarity with some of these answers that he's giving. We know that it's been, I don't know how long he's been with the county, but we've been talking about this now for 10 years, and it's costing the county millions and millions and millions of extra money that did not need to be spent. So that's what delay has gotten us so far, and again, we're seeing civil unrest. So perhaps it would behoove us to have an agenda item in the future that was devoted directly to making concrete answers regarding timeframes and exactly what's going to be happening here, rather than just coming back every month and hearing that we think this is what's happening, and then the citizens have to go and do a bunch of investigation to try to figure out what's really going on. And it's not clear that anybody really knows. We are glad that the slalom report now has been tendered to him. We're not really clear what it said originally and what it says now, but hopefully we'll be able to move forward and get this system built, because we know one thing, it's not rocket science. New Hampshire already did it. They did it like that. They decided to do it, they did it, it's done. We could also do that, and I hope we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Seeing no further public comment, I call the meeting adjourned at 7:32 p.m. Thank you.